Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The disclosure didn't arrive with a laugh or a poke or the theatrical fury that had so frequently defined moments of verity in Genoa City. Rather, it came still like a fault line eventually giving way beneath ground that everyone believed was solid. The day was ordinary on the face, deceptively so, with the familiar meter of life continued around the people whose lives were about to fracture ever. Phyllis Summers had always believed that verity carried weight, that when it eventually surfaced it would crash through the lives of those involved with inarguable force. Yet indeed she was unrehearsed for how fully this verity would collapse the world of the man she formerly loved and the son she had sworn to cover at all costs. Phyllis had spent times carrying the knowledge like a live line wrapped around her heart. Every smile she gave Summer, every discussion with Nick that drifted toward the history, every family gathering where Horselaugh felt just a little too loud, had been visited by what she knew. She had induced herself that silence was mercy. She told herself that some trueness were too destructive to be set free, that love occasionally meant lying well enough for everyone to survive. But survival, she was beginning to understand, wasn't the same as living. And lies had a way of poisoning everything they touched no matter how precisely they were handled. Summer had grown into herself with a confidence that both impressed and unsettled her mama. She was no longer the child who accepted the stories she was told without question. She had begun to ask harder effects of the people around her, demanding honesty, demanding thickness, demanding to know where she truly belonged. Those questions had scraped against Phyllis's precisely constructed defenses, making the secret harder to contain. Phyllis could feel the verity pressing outward, seeking release, as if it had grown tired of being hidden, and was ready to claim its place in the open air. Nick, for his part, was restless in ways he couldn't articulate. There was a subtle apprehension beneath his calm surface, a sense that commodity abecedarian was off balance. He'd always believed he understood his life, his connections, his part as a father. Summer was his anchor, the evidence that despite all the miscalculations and chaos, commodity beautiful had come from his history. He carried that certainty with him like armor, ignorant that it was formerly cracking. The battle began without warning, touched off by nothing more dramatic than a discussion that refused to stay superficial. Summer, frustrated by avoidance and half-answers she had encountered lately, pushed harder than she ever had ahead. She wanted clarity, not just consolation. She wanted data, not passions. Phyllis honored the moment for what it was, the last chance to choose verity over comfort, honesty over vision. Her heart pounded as she realized that if she didn't speak now, she might no way find the courage again. When Phyllis eventually revealed that Nick was Aunt Summer's natural father, the words sounded fantastic indeed to her as she spoke them. They floated in the air, fragile and ruinous, before settling into the silence that followed. Summer's face drained of color, her mind floundering to attune the mama she trusted with the reality she was being asked to accept. Nick's response was slower, more dangerous in its restraint. At first, there was unbelief, a reflexive rejection of an idea too painful to consider. He laughed vocally, shaking his head, as though Phyllis had made a terrible joke. But the look in her eyes told him this was no joke. It was the verity he'd no way been allowed to know. The identity of Summer's natural father, formerly spoken, carried with it a history of choices and consequences that could no longer be ignored. Phyllis laid it all bare, every decision she had made, every fear that had guided her silence. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't ask for remission. She simply told the story as it had happened, raw and undressed, because anything lower would have been another taradiddle. With each detail, Nick felt the foundation of his life eroding beneath him. Memories he'd cherished now felt uncertain, their meaning suddenly over for concession. For Summer, the disclosure was an earthquake. Her sense of tone had always been tied to the idea of who her parents were, to the heritage she believed she carried. Now that narrative was in question. She oscillated between wrathfulness and confusion, between a hopeless need for answers and an inversely important appetite to run from them. The man she had called her father was still standing in front of her, still loving her, still reeling from the same shock. Yet commodity abecedarian had shifted, and she could feel the distance growing indeed as she clung to him. Nick's world collapsed not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of quiet consummations that followed the concession. He replayed times of his life through a new lens, wondering which moments had been real, and which had been shaped by a taradiddle. His identity as Summer's father had been central to who he believed himself to be. To learn that biology didn't support that belief felt like a theft, a cruel rewriting of his particular history. Wrathfulness surged through him, directed at Phyllis, at fate, at himself for no way suspecting the verity. Yet beneath the wrathfulness was grief, deep and paining, for commodity he'd lost without ever knowing it was at threat. Phyllis watched the desolation unfold with a blend of remorse and grim acceptance. She knew there would be consequences, that the connection she valued might no way recover. But she also knew that continuing the taradiddle would have been a different kind of destruction, one that would have grown more poisonous with time. She had always flattered herself on being a survivor, on doing whatever it took to cover herself and those she loved. This time survival needed honesty no matter how painful. As the verity gurgled outward, it affected everyone in its path. Family members plotted to find their footing, doubtful how to offer support without taking sides. Old injuries were restarted, long-buried resentments resurfacing in the wake of the disclosure. The history, it sounded, was no way truly once in Genoa City. It awaited patiently for the right moment to demand acknowledgement. Exchanges came tense, ganders loaded with implied questions. Trust, formerly broken, proved delicate to repair. Nick withdrew into himself, scuffling with feelings he'd no language for. He questioned what it meant to be a father, whether love and commitment could overweigh biology, whether the bond he participated with Summer was any lower real because of what he'd learned. In quieter moments, down from the immediate fallout, he realized that his passions for her hadn't changed. He still bothered about her, still wanted to cover her, still felt pride in the woman she was getting. And yet, the knowledge eroded at him. A patient memorial that commodity abecedarian had shifted. Summer, meanwhile, began her own trip toward understanding. She sought out information, making together a new narrative of her origins. Each discovery brought fresh pain but also a strange sense of clarity. She brazened Phyllis with questions that cut deep, demanding to know how her mama could have kept such a secret for so long. Phyllis didn't wince down from the wrathfulness. She accepted it as the price of her choices, understanding that remission, if it came at each, would take time. The disclosure of Summer's natural father introduced new complications, new connections to navigate, new prospects to manage. It forced everyone involved to review what they believed about family, fidelity, and identity. The simple delineations they had reckoned upon no longer applied. Rather, they were left to construct commodity more complex, commodity that conceded both the verity of biology and the power of chosen bonds. In the fate, moments of quiet reflection came as significant as the competitions. Nick stood alone more frequently, looking out over a megacity that suddenly felt strange. He allowed about the choices he'd made, the ways his life had intertwined with Phyllis's, the paths not taken. He wondered whether knowing the verity before would have changed anything, or whether the pain he felt now was ineluctable. There were no easy answers, only the slow, delicate work of accepting a reality he'd no way asked for. Phyllis, stripped of the secret that had defined so much of her life, felt both lighter and unbearably exposed. She faced the consequences with the same fierce determination that had always characterized her. She knew she couldn't undo the history, but she could choose how to move forward. Her relationship with Summer would have to be rebuilt on a foundation of honesty, no matter how fragile that foundation felt at first. With Nick, the path was less certain. The love they had participated had been complicated indeed before the verity came out. Now it was tangled in treason and loss, and only time would reveal whether it could survive. Summer stood at the center of it all, her life irrevocably changed by a verity she had no way known she demanded. She suffered the simplicity of her old identity indeed as she began to shape a new bone. The disclosure forced her to grow in ways she hadn't anticipated, to defy questions about who she was independent of her parents' choices. In that struggle, she set up a adaptability she hadn't known she held. Nick's world, though collapsed, wasn't entirely destroyed. From the wreckage, he began to see that the substance of what signified to him remained complete. His love for Summer didn't evaporate with the truth, however. It came commodity he to choose purposely rather than take for granted, if anything. That choice, painful as it was, carried its own kind of power. It allowed him to review motherhood on his own terms, embedded in presence and commitment rather than biology alone. The disclosure would echo through their lives for times to come, shaping opinions and connections in ways none of them could yet provision. In Genoa City, secrets infrequently stayed buried ever, and when they surfaced, they demanded metamorphosis. Phyllis's concession had shattered visions, but it also opened the door to commodity more honest, if far more delicate. Nick's world had collapsed, yes, but in the quiet spaces that followed, there was the possibility of rebuilding commodity real, commodity predicated in verity rather than fear. And for Summer, the verity, painful as it was, came the starting point for a deeper understanding of herself and the complicated, amiss people who loved her. The days that followed the disclosure didn't move forward in a straight line. Time stretched and folded in on itself, each hour heavy with the residue of what had been said. The verity hadn't simply landed and passed. It dallied, cleaved to every commerce, reshaped indeed the most ordinary moments. In Genoa City, life had a way of continuing indeed after desolation, but for those at the center of the storm, nothing felt routine presently. Nick set up himself waking in the middle of the night, his studies circling the same questions again and again. The silence of his home pressed in on him, amplifying recollections he could no longer trust. He flashed back holding Summer as a baby, the inviting sense of responsibility and love that had swamped him in those early days. Those recollections were still pictorial, still emotionally real, yet now they were shadowed by mistrustfulness. He asked himself whether the verity lowered those moments or if they stood on their own merit, untouched by biology. The conflict tore at him, leaving him emotionally exhausted before each new day indeed began. Phyllis too was insomniac. Without the secret to guard, she felt exposed in a way she no way had ahead. Her mind replayed the concession endlessly, checking every word she had chosen, every pause, every look on Summer's face. She knew she had done the right thing, at least intellectually, but emotionally she was drowning in remorse. She had spent so long believing that control equaled safety, that managing the narrative would cover everyone involved. Now she understood that control had been in vision, one that had bring her dearly. Summer drifted between wrathfulness and impassiveness, doubtful which was more sufferable. There were moments when she wanted to scream, to demand explanations that could no way completely satisfy her. Other times she felt detached, as though she were watching someone additional's life unfold. The question of her natural father impended large, but it wasn't the only thing troubling her. She plotted with the consummation that the people she loved most had shaped her reality without her concurrence. Trust, formerly broken, wasn't fluently restored, and she wondered how long it would take ahead she could look at her mama without feeling the sting of treason. The broader family felt the temblors as well. Exchanges were careful, measured, everyone cautious of saying the wrong thing. Some offered sympathy to Nick, admitting the pain he carried. Others concentrated on Summer, fating that she was the one whose identity had been most directly impacted. Phyllis tasted judgment in every regard, whether real or imagined. She accepted it without complaint, believing she merited whatever review came her way. Yet beneath her guilt was a quiet defiance. She refused to apologize for loving her son fiercely, indeed if that love had led her down a deeply defective path. Nick's relationship with Summer entered a delicate new phase. He wanted to assure her, to tell her that nothing had changed, but he stressed that averring on that might abate her experience. Rather, he chose to be present in quieter ways, offering support without demands. They participated moments of silence that spoke volumes, each scuffling with their own feelings while drawing comfort from the familiar bond between them. In those moments, Nick began to realize that motherhood wasn't commodity that could be cancelled by a disclosure, no matter how ruinous. Summer, for her part, watched Nick nearly, searching for signs that he might pull down. Every time he showed up, every time he heeded without judgment, she felt an admixture of relief and guilt. She hadn't chosen this verity any further than he had, yet she bothered that her need to understand her origins might hurt the man who had raised her. The complexity of her passions forced her to grow up snappily, to navigate emotional home she had no way anticipated. Phyllis tried to rebuild her relationship with Summer sluggishly, apprehensive that trust couldn't be demanded or rushed. She offered honesty without guard, answering questions indeed when they cut deeply. She defied the appetite to justify her choices, fastening rather on admitting the pain she had caused. Some days Summer responded with guarded openness. Other days she withdrew, unfit to engage. Phyllis learned to accept both responses as part of the process, reminding herself that mending was infrequently direct. The identity of Summer's natural father, now known, introduced a new subcast of pressure. His actuality was no longer abstract. It was a reality that had to be brazened. The eventuality for connection, rejection, or disappointment hung in the air. Summer scuffled with whether she wanted to pursue that relationship, uncertain what she hoped to gain. She stressed that seeking answers might further complicate an formerly fragile situation, yet she also tasted that ignoring this part of herself would only delay the ineluctable. Nick grappled with unanticipated covetousness and instability, feelings that surprised him with their intensity. He abominated himself for feeling hovered, knowing intellectually that Summer's desire to understand her origins was into rejection of him. Still, the fear dallied that he might lose his place in her life, that the bond they participated could be weakened by forces beyond his control. Defying those fears forced him to examine his own identity, to separate his worth as a father from circumstances he couldn't change. As weeks passed, the original shock gave way to a quieter, more patient pang. Life demanded attention, liabilities couldn't be ignored, and sluggishly the family began to serve again. Yet the verity remained a constant presence, impacting opinions both large and small. Exchanges were more deliberate, feelings closer to the face. There was a sense that everyone involved had been stripped of pretense, left with nothing but honesty and vulnerability. Phyllis set up herself reflecting on her once choices with new clarity. She honored patterns she had long denied, moments when fear had driven her conduct further than love. The disclosure forced her to defy not just this single taradiddle, but the broader ways she had manipulated situations to maintain control. It was an uncomfortable reckoning, but also an occasion for growth. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine an unborn defined by translucency rather than secrets. Summer's trip toward tone understanding continued, marked by both lapses and improvements. She began to see that her identity wasn't solely determined by biology or family history, but by the values she chose to embrace. The consummation brought a sense of commission, indeed as it challenged her to review herself. She learned to hold multiple trueness at formerly that she was hurt by her mama's deception, thankful for Nick's unvarying presence, and curious about the man who participated her DNA. Nick, sluggishly arising from the collapse of his world, started to find stability in unanticipated places. He leaned on Gemütlichkeit, allowed himself to express vulnerability, and conceded the depth of his grief. In doing so, he discovered adaptability he hadn't known he held. The pain didn't vanish, but it came more manageable, woven into a broader understanding of what it meant to love without guarantees. The ripple goods of the disclosure extended beyond the immediate family, impacting connections throughout Genoa City. Old alliances shifted, new pressures surfaced, and the story came part of the megacity's collaborative memory. Some saw it as an exemplary tale about secrets and consequences. Others viewed it as a testament to the enduring power of love. For those living it, it was both. In the end, the verity did what it always did: it changed everything. It disassembled visions, forced delicate exchanges, and demanded growth from everyone involved. Yet within the wreckage, there was also the possibility of commodity stronger, more authentic. Nick's world had collapsed, but from its remains, a new understanding of family began to take shape, one erected not on hypotheticals or secrets, but on choice, honesty, and the courage to face reality, no matter how painful. And for Summer, standing at the crossroad of history and future, the verity came not just an ending, but a morning. A beginning defined by tone discovery, adaptability, and the knowledge that while the circumstances of her birth had been hidden from her, the love that girdled her, amiss, complicated, and fiercely real, was commodity she could still choose to believe in. In the quiet fate, when the arguments had faded and the gashes had eventually run dry, a different kind of reckoning settled over them all. It was no longer about shock or blameworthiness, but about abidance. Each of them had to decide how to live with what couldn't be undone. The verity had rewritten their history, But it didn't abolish the times of participated recollections, offerings, and love that had shaped them. Nick came to understand that collapse didn't always mean destruction. Occasionally it meant stripping life down to its most honest corridor. In choosing to remain present for Summer, not out of obligation but out of love, he reclaimed a sense of purpose that the disclosure had nearly taken from him. Phyllis, forced to live without the armor of secretiveness, began the slow work of getting someone who no longer ran from the consequences of her choices. And Summer, standing between them, learned that identity wasn't commodity handed down complete, but commodity erected, piece by piece, through verity and resoluteness. What remained was fragile, amiss, and uncertain, but it was real. And in Genoa City, reality, still painful, was the only ground strong enough to make a future on.